It's time for Fox and Friends.
Fascinating story. Nationally, 95% of kindergartners are vaccinated, but in as many as 7 states, that number is much lower now because of exemptions for religious and philosophical reasons. And with that measles outbreak growing, many are wondering if those parents who choose not to vaccinate their children should be held criminally liable, or just liable in general. So can and should these parents be sued? Joining me now for a fair and balanced legal debate, former prosecutor Elliot Felig and defense attorney Evangeline Gomez. Nice to see both of you this morning.
Good morning.
All right, so this idea that you could go to Disneyland, you know, parents out there watching, put yourself in these families' shoes, right? You're going to Disneyland, you have a newborn perhaps, and because some parent doesn't vaccinate their child, your baby ends up getting brain damage as a result of contracting measles. Does that family then have a right to sue the family for passing that disease on?
Absolutely. Choices have consequences. Bad choices have bad consequences. And sending your kid to Disneyland or to school without their having been properly vaccinated is an especially bad choice, almost as bad as sending your kid to school with a loaded gun. And when your bad choices impose harm on others, you have got to pay.
No suing? You don't think that this could happen? I mean, how difficult would this be to prove? I mean, how do we know, though, that this family is responsible for my child? There could be 20 people there.
That's a great point, and that's the issue for the courts. How do we prove this? And then you also have a lot of states that have different laws. They have various exemptions. Some states only for medical reasons, other states for religious and for, quote-unquote, philosophical reasons, whatever those are. And so the problem is, you should then look to the states, have the legislature actually take this and say, look, we're only going to grant it for medical exemptions. That's how the law should read. But if you have these different states with these different laws, it's very difficult for anyone to prosecute this criminally and for any court to say you've got civil liability. Now, there is an exemption for this, okay? The one exception that you would have is, let's say you don't like little Tommy and you know your daughter has measles. Well, let me invite little Tommy over so I can give him measles. That would be a situation where you would see a court intervene.
What about the company here? What about Disney itself? How would they... Do they have an obligation, or can they do something about this? Is there something that a company, with all of these people coming to this petri dish of Disneyland in California, what can they do?
I don't know that there's a viable way for a large entity which has so many people passing through, like Grand Central Station or Disneyland, to really prevent this from happening. That's why we have to impose the liability on those who are in a position to prevent it from happening, like the parents, or maybe say the school has to have a rule. But we rely on our legislatures for public safety. This is a public safety issue. It's very rare that there's such widespread agreement in the medical and scientific community about the efficacy of something. Vaccines work. We know it.
I mean, let's talk about the schools. That's a fascinating debate, right? Because we're sitting there, you got your kid vaccinated, and then suddenly little Tommy comes into school. Tommy's the troublemaker, the problem again, because these parents chose not to. What legal right do the other families have in that situation?
Well, the issue is you're not going to see a court's point. How do you know who infected who in this situation? That's the problem with Disneyland. How do you get the names, the addresses of people there? How do you find out who was responsible for spreading this? You can't. It's too expensive, and frankly, courts are not going to waste their time on finding out and going on this goose chase as to who's responsible.
Elliot, I'll give you a final word.
Look, the causation issue is, of course, always a challenge. That's why we look to larger entities, whether it's the schools, whether it's the states. But look, the debate is over on this, okay? Public safety trumps religion, it trumps other factors, and there's no debate anymore on the efficacy of these vaccines.
And it's pretty lax in California, where they not only have the religious exemptions, they've got philosophical exemptions as well.
That's right, and there are proof issues there. You can just get any kind of note, write anything, submit it.
Elliot and Evangeline, nice to see both of you this morning. Thank
you very much.
Thank you.
And let us you guys can weigh in on our Facebook page this morning as well, FF Weekend. Coming up here on the show, it's an incredible story. A man wakes up from being in a vegetative state 12 years later. So what did he say? You're going to hear from him next. Plus, the secret to getting anything you want. Learn from an FBI negotiator. The tips you don't want to miss.
If you could